This is Show Up as a Leader, a show from People Forward Network, helping you maximize your positive impact on the world by becoming your best, fully authentic self. Hey everyone, it's Rosie. I am super excited to have my dear friend, Rana DeBoer, co-founder of Volt Strategy, launch a new series on the podcast called Elevate Your Leadership. In this series, Rana offers a unique blend of behavioral science and business strategy to help leaders take their cultures to the next level and build future-ready organizations. Take a listen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Elevate Your Leadership podcast. I am your host, Rana DeBoer, an executive and organizational coach who helps leaders just like you transform your energy, your strategy, and your talent for really exceptional performance. So thanks for joining us today. So happy to have you here listening in, ready to learn and grow and take some great tips and put them into action for your own leadership and for high-performing teams. So on that note of well-being and resilience, did you know that with one simple phrase, you can completely shift the outcome of a conversation? So here's what I know. Many of you are probably saying, yeah, Rana, I do know that, because we know that the brain scans for threats, right? More than 5 times per second. Okay, mind blown. Just think about that for a second. The brain scans for threats more than 5 times per second. And here's the kicker, responds in about 15 milliseconds with this whole waterfall cascade of physiological, psychological changes. So here's my challenge. It's not just a simple phrase that can shift the outcome of a conversation. Today, where we are in leadership today, it's a simple, yes, science-based. And what I want to propose to you, because of that great science, is a little bit of a magical phrase that gets you into better conversations with better results. And hey, magical phrases really goes along well with this magical time of year, because we're recording today's podcast right in the middle of the holiday season. So what I know for sure is if you're like me, a couple of these magical phrases may come in handy with your in-laws. You know what I mean? I can hear you laughing. You totally know what I mean. But real quick, before we get started, if you haven't, be sure to grab your Peak Leader Guide that goes along with this episode. Go to Volt Strategy, V as in victory mindset, voltstrategy.com/resources. And of course, a quick plug. I got to do it. If you have not, be sure to check out some of those previous episodes, which have been building up to where we are today, right? A guided curricula. But don't worry. You don't need to go back. You're good to go. So stay right here, grab your guide, and let's get started. So what do we know? We know that communication is the hub of really strong relationships, right? We totally know that. Communication is the core, the anchor point of great organizational cultures. It truly enables people and kind of those processes or the mechanics and the systems and our work to commingle, if you will, commingle in the right and really healthy way, again, to achieve those results, both for people personally and for our organizations. So I've kind of always loved that phrase, right? Like communication makes the world go round. So true. But we know it's actually more than that. It's really about the art of great conversations. The art of great conversations. And that's what we're going to dive into today with these simple, science-based magical phrases. Because at the core, it truly is conversations that make all the things, right? I mean, all the things work. It's truly conversations that create culture. And It's even more than that. It's the mindsets underneath the conversations that create culture. And that's what we're going to dive in today, is helping you with some real science-based, human science, human performance stuff, just to put a cheat sheet at the tip of your fingers to use in your leadership, these magical phrases. So in his book, Super Communications, which I have right here in my hand with like all kinds of sticky tabs and underlines and highlights in it, Charles Duhigg lays out just this very basic, but I think also very overlooked core element of communication. All right, so it goes like this. When we are not neutrally aligned, we have trouble communicating. But when we start thinking alike, we understand each other better. So in the language of neuroscience, that's what we call neurally entrained. Fun fact. So the essential truth here is really simple. To communicate with someone, we must connect with them first. Great example of this. I recently had the complete honor and privilege of facilitating a nursing summit for the University of South Dakota College of Nursing and the Nursing Network. The goal of the day was to try to solve for the nursing crisis, right? This workforce crisis that we're having in our state. And we've got nursing and healthcare leaders from all across the state, right? Competitors to different sectors that must come together and align in order to solve for this workforce crisis. And as we started out this summit, we designed it in a way so that people could really build relationships at the beginning. And our opening phrase was, we must connect before we can correct. And it was just a beautiful day of great conversations, of understanding one another. And I do believe and will tell you, and so will the participants, that starting out the day with this whole neuroscience of let's get aligned, let's truly neurally entrain, and then let's go in and solve that problem. So in essence, that's a bit of what today's podcast is about. Before we get into the goods, let's layer on a little more of some stats and some science around this, because there are some key contributing factors to why it really feels like communication skills just are continuing to degrade. And I can't be the only one who's feeling that. And as I work with my clients from so many different industries and so many different sectors across the Midwest here, for certain, we talk about communication all the time. So factors that are getting in the way are digital dependence, right? Excessive texting, that social media. I'm not going to say more than that. That is just a fact, right? That's a brutal fact that we have to look at, in addition to a brutal fact of information overload. There is so much information coming from so many places. And then to add on, we're not sure where sources of truth are, which is another factor of that misinterpretation, misunderstanding, or misguidance in media communications. Without question, I think this one's really worth mentioning, is that we've got a little bit of that social anxiety. We just do. How could we not? A little fear of judgment, some hesitation to truly, authentically express some of our thoughts or ideas, and certainly leaning into harder conversations, right? We've got distractions, multitasking, constant notifications, all taking us away from that such important critical skill of active listening. We've got some of those cultural differences, and we do have those mental health concerns, right? Depression, anxiety, those get in the way. They are a factor in our ability to connect and become aligned. So again, today is about what are those magical phrases and ways that we can tackle that. So before we get there, though, one other quick thing that I think is really interesting research from Preply, about 2,200 Americans saying, what's the worst communication habits? And shocker, are you ready for this? Apparently, Americans have a problem with interrupting and talking over each other. So respondents ranked some of the most frequent communication problems that they experience. So see if any of these resonate with you. You ready? Being interrupted, being talked over, having to repeat yourself. Yeah. And you know what's worse about all of that is that I've done that to people. I recently caught myself doing that with my colleague Jen a couple of weeks ago. And I was just like, oh, Rana, practice what you preach, lady. Like, oh my goodness. So I'm just as guilty as everyone else. So what's annoying, most annoying when you're talking to a person is when they lack empathy. They've got this passive aggressive tone. They assume that you know what they mean instead of asking. They talk about themselves constantly. Maybe they get overly emotional. And research in this study also says uses you instead of I statements. Well, I can resonate with all of those. And again, I can be guilty of those. But here's a fun fact. Are you ready for this? This is fascinating. So put this in your leadership hat and spin this over a little bit as we talk through the rest of the day, the rest of the episode. Yeah, I'm with you all day. Oh my gosh, I would probably drive you crazy. So respondents in this study, self-confidence in their communication skills dropped with each generation. Baby boomers scored themselves the highest, followed by Gen X and millennials, with Gen Z ranking themselves as the worst communicators. Interesting, right? Okay. And let's take just a moment to talk relationships. Relationship problems, defensiveness, 90%, criticism, 85%, lack of compromise, 80%, stonewalling, 74%, and belittling, 63%. Common in majority of American relationships, common problems. Interesting. Okay. Now that we've painted this picture of doom and gloom, which was not my intention, but rather to just say it's real. Like, and I hope you can resonate with a few of those things. Let's get to the magic. Here's what we know. Research published by the APA in 2021, so right around that COVID area, great timing for this research, proved that people benefit from deep and meaningful conversations because they help us forge connections and provide that sense of safety and belonging that we need to see and feel every 5 seconds. But what the research found is that we often stick to the small talk because we truly underestimate, how much the other person might actually be interested in hearing our story, how we're doing, and going a little bit deep. And that we believe it would be awkward and not enjoyable for that other person, but we're actually wrong. We're actually wrong about that. So someone hit the buzzer, like, not true. So how do we shift this? How do we take today's podcast and start to shift this communication piece into the next level, right? So somewhere in the middle of all of this, what we need is what's called relational intelligence, empathetic intelligence, and conversational intelligence. So we need more than only emotional intelligence. We got to level up in these skills of relational, empathetic, and conversational intelligence so that we can go further. And this is where the magic really happens. Because remember, in that 2024 Gallup workplace report, and I love this, I use this so much, it's so helpful. They talk about the fact that one meaningful conversation per week develops high performance more than any other single leadership activity, right? Any other leadership activity. So think about this for a second. Here's your homework, fieldwork exercise, which you can find in the Leader Guide. Think about a person that you have great conversations with. You just seem to always have great conversations with them. And then think about that person that you often have poor conversations with. And why is that? What are those things? What's the differences between the two? And one important factor just to think about is that 5-second scan, right? Think about that every 5 seconds, am I safe here? So here we go. I'm offering you 5 key steps and 5 key phrases. So to build that relational intelligence, right? We've got to build rapport, understand others, develop trust, and cultivate influence. That's the key word there, is cultivating that influence. And it has to happen sequentially in that order. So I'm going to offer you what I call the anatomy of a great conversation, right? 5 key steps. Number 1, level set. This is you. This is ground zero, and I call it stop, where you become self-aware. You take that time out and you position yourself for a great conversation. All of the things that we've just talked about. So this is about that self-regulation, kind of set that intent. How do I want to show up in this conversation? And that's where you can lean into your core values, right? Your personal leadership philosophy. So ground zero, step number 1 is just level setting. Stop, take a breath. What is that energy that you're bringing into this conversation? And step number 2 is about building rapport. And this can happen in just a second, which we'll get to the phrases that will help you do that. That can happen in just a second. So step number 3 is using those great phrases and asking great questions. We know this, right? We know this. Number 4 is listen, which means zip it, right? We just zip it and we listen. We actively, fully listen. And if we've done step number 1 and we've stopped, we can. And then, of course, 5 is to dance and to commit. The dance piece I'll save for later. The commit piece I want to focus in on for just a moment. And the commit is that we commit to working on the relationship right now in the moment, right? Everything else goes away. We commit to that relationship right there and we build that trust. We commit to building the trust in the conversation and creating that alignment, that neural entrainment. And then we follow up. Easier said than done though, right? Totally easier said than done. So let's get to these magical phrases that help us get better aligned and better results. Magical phrase number 1, help me understand, which is a great statement or phrase that says, I respect you. I respect what you have to say. And it's a relatability statement. I'm relating to you. I'm working on this relationship. So help me understand. And you may follow it up with something like, I'm not tracking with you on this and want to see where you're coming from. I'm not fully understanding how you came to this point or place. So can you say more about that? Which is magical phrase number 2, which relates to help me understand, but it's a little bit different here, right? So say more about that or tell me more. It offers a little more curiosity. For example, you may follow it up with something like, I'm interested to learn more about your perspective on this. I'm wondering if we're saying the same thing, right? So tell me more. I'm wondering if we're saying the same thing. But can you feel the respect and the ultimate diffusing that does of tension? How it slows down that 5 seconds or puts that 5-second review into a really healthy space? Very honoring and respectful statements that helps you to align and find a common goal in that conversation. And I bet many of you use those 2, which is awesome. So high five. Thank you. That's great. Magical phrase number 3. Here it is. This is hard and it's important. This is a beautiful phrase to acknowledge the tension, to acknowledge the uncomfortableness, right? Name it to tame it. That's essentially what we're doing, which diffuses that primal brain. But it also says, but together we'll figure it out. So you might say something like, this is hard and it's important. I know we're at odds. We're not seeing this the same way. So let's figure this out, right? This is hard and it's important. I have some really critical feedback to give you about your recent performance. You guys, maybe this is a phrase that works really well when you're stuck in a project, right? So it isn't just about conflict or tension. It might be a way to get unstuck. So a great example is a current team I was working with had an amazing strategic plan to a beautiful community development. They were really, really stuck in a couple key spots. We're sitting in this moment at the table where everyone is just like, I don't know what to do. We don't know where to go. And I simply said, this is hard and it's important. And one of the other leaders looked at me, took that, and said, "It is, but I'm confident that we can figure this out. Let's get aligned on truly where we are right now in this project and what success looks like." So sometimes it's just these magical statements, these really easy statements that can cut through the chase in a very honoring, respectful way that makes sure people feel safe and they know that their voices are important. Okay, magical phrase number 4, time out. This matters. So it's similar to number 3, but it demands a little more resolution and it allows the other person to go a little bit deeper in their share, right? Because we want to go a little bit deeper. We just need this phrase that helps us get there, right? It's like a lever or a cheat sheet of these great phrases, but it's a lever we can pull to take that conversation to the next level. So again, number 4, time out. This matters. And you might follow it up with something like, "I want to be sure I'm understanding you. Time out. This matters. If I heard you right, you're saying," and then fill in the blank. Time out. This matters. If I'm understanding you correctly, and then you can paraphrase back to that person what you heard. And it just allows this really rich dialogue to get a little bit deeper. Okay, there are tons of magical phrases, but I'm only giving you 5 big ones that I think have been most impactful for all the people that I've worked with and also in my own leadership. And number 5 is a big one. And it's going to sound like a question, but it's actually more of a statement. And it goes like this: what are you hoping for? It shifts the ownership to the other person. And I understand a conversation is a two-way. 2 people have ownership in the conversation, but at some point, leaders, we have to be able to shift that ownership over to the other person. What are you hoping for? Is a real honoring and respectful way to hand that ownership over. And you might follow up with a question that says something like, what are you looking for in this conversation? How are you hoping I might respond? Or potentially, what do you need from me? It's a very powerful statement that you can then follow up with a deeper question. Okay, I hope those are helpful. Again, get the leader guide so that you can get all of them and then cheat sheet to all the things that we've talked about. But before we close up, I've got to give you one last thing, a bonus phrase. And this is so fun. I want to be sure to also give you a question that will jumpstart great conversations with a fresh new energy, maybe than you ever have before. And if you use this question already, like, you got to connect with me because I'd like to know how you use it, when you use it. And I'd just like to know that I'm not the only person who's crazy and goes out kind of on a little whim here and throws this question out to people. But if you want to like permanently, I'm saying permanently kind of kill the small talk, right? And there's a time and place for small talk, but sometimes we got to go a little further. Your very first order of priority is to ban questions like, so what do you do? Or how are you today? Right? The killer question. This is so fun that will get just a whole nother level of relationship building and communication going is, what's your story? And you got to say it in a really good way. Tell me about your story. This is a beautiful question that's guaranteed to trigger some fun and interesting conversation. Probably after the person kind of gets over the initial shock that you just asked them that. But think about it. You're giving that person access to speak from their hearts and share a little bit more about their life and their life's journey. So give it a try. Again, we're recording during this holiday season. It might be a great icebreaker with some new people that you're meeting, or even with a family member that you thought you knew. And then you ask them, so tell me your story. You're going to learn something really fun, new, and interesting, and create some deeper alignment and deeper connections. So we've really just scratched the surface on all this communication and conversation stuff, right? If I can be any help to you going deeper, developing some of those critical skills, I love taking the science and making it practical, putting it into action for people. So I'd love to be that strategic partner with you and keep learning and growing on this, gang. I mean, if you want to elevate your leadership, communication skills are without a doubt one of the number ones. So what did we learn today? The 5-second scan is a game changer. It's a nugget of science in your leadership effectiveness for sure. That by taking stop before we engage in a conversation really helps us get to that relational, conversational, and empathetic intelligence that we need to make a difference. And that simple but science-based magical phrases are truly the cheat sheet we need to navigate these busy days and fast-moving business. I can't wait to catch you on the next episode where we're going to talk about the circle of connection, which really puts this entire series kind of together. And I think I'm liking the word catapults us into some more incredible tools for being a peak leader. So more on that to come. Make sure that you tune in for the next episode. So thank you so much for being here, for listening in and taking the time to invest in you, because by doing that, you are a better husband, wife. You're investing in your team, in your organization, and of course, better business makes better communities. So don't forget to grab that Peak Leader Guide and all of those from the other great episodes too, because you're going to want that cheat sheet of magical phrases and that anatomy of a great conversation. So go find me on LinkedIn. Catch my website, voltstrategy.com/resources. Okay, take care, friends, and keep leading with purpose-driven, energy-fueled, self-aware with that bias for action and knowledge-hungry leadership.
I'm Rosie Ward, and this is Show Up as a Leader. To learn more, head over to peopleforwardnetwork.com and, of course, hit that follow button.